So good morning, everyone. Good morning to you all and welcome to our forum. It's great to see you here and thank you all very much for taking the time. My name's Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director within Protiviti here in the UK, and I'm joined by my colleagues from Protiviti, as well as by my colleagues from our sister company, Robert Half. As many of you know by now, this is our weekly collaboration forum, a forum for us all to collaborate and to learn from each other. We started this 16 weeks ago and collaborating around the disruption caused to all of our businesses by COVID and looking at how we remain resilient. And over the last few weeks, the focus has shifted and we've talked a lot more about how we approach the future. And in particular, we've been discussing how we reimagine our businesses before we leap back into business as normal or even business as now. Our aim has remained consistent throughout those weeks. And really what we hope is that by hearing the forum insights, the innovations, the perspectives that you hear from everyone, you will be able to join the dots to your own challenges, which hopefully helps in your own decision making and gives you greater confidence to make the right decisions and make them quickly. So last week, it was fantastic to see how perspectives shared by our panelists really resonated with a lot of you and stirred up so much debate. We heard from Serco about the contact tracing support they've been providing. We heard from the London Stock Exchange on the unexpectedly high levels of liquidity in the market, as well as some ProSec partners around principles for digital communication strategies and the need for authentic messaging. This week, as promised, we've altered the format slightly, and I'm delighted that we're turning our attention to a theme of sport, to the world of sport. We'll be looking at sport as a business, how it has adapted over the last few months, as well as the very human side of sport and the sporting qualities and disciplines that as themes are relevant to a lot of you as business leaders. We brought together a fantastic range of panelists from across the sporting world today to give you, our attendees, some different perspectives, some inspiration, and I hope just unexpected viewpoints that really help you and just give you inspiration. So one of the driving forces behind today has been my colleague Matt Weston. I'm our leader of the Robert Half business here in the UK. So Matt, I wonder if you could just give a little bit of background as why you've been keen to bring a sporting theme to the forum, please.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning to everyone. Great that you could join us, and great to have such a great turnout this morning. Obviously, this is our 16th week in partnership with Protiviti. We've had a tremendous panelists and great teams over the last sort of 15 weeks, but we were really passionate about bringing a sporting theme to this week. As we all know, sport plays a huge part in our lives. I've missed my match of the day. I've missed taking my kids to sporting events. Many sporting events have been cancelled. We've obviously had the Euros, it was a big sporting event, the Olympics, we're still debating what will happen with the Ryder Cup, and access to gyms and pools has been curtailed. And I think we are all social people, and I think sport allows social cohesion, it has social and emotional well-being, it creates role models, and it fosters communication and builds communities. And there's that, but also, sport in general is globally a £800 billion industry, and has a knock-on effect into sort of catering, infrastructure, tourism. So we felt it was a really important topic. What we wanted to cover today was really how the industry is coping, what the recovery is looking like and what to expect. And as we all know, sporting stars are known for their mental resilience, their determination. So I'd be keen to get an insight. Normally every week, either myself or Layla does sort of a recruitment barometer. We're going to save that and maybe go into maybe some of the numbers in the after party. But needless to say, it's very positive. We're seeing sequential movement. So we're very pleased with how the market is moving. We're not back to pre-COVID numbers. We're actually probably about 73% of job flow, but definitely moving in the right direction. But some of the things that our clients are talking to us about as we communicate with our clients across our 22 branch network is really furlough, how they're going to get people back up to speed. And I think it would be great to hear some of the insights, maybe from Nick, what he's doing with some of the players, getting them back up to speed, the pace of plays change, technology development, teamwork, the leadership styles of companies, how they're going to maybe adapt from a command and control to more agility and flexibility, managing teams that maybe are remotely managed or not sitting together, not in the office, and how they manage them, performance management in the new normal or the new world. And really retention strategies, there's certainly going to be in the industries that we recruit for still a war for talent, and how you maintain employee health, well-being. One of the main questions we're hearing from our clients is how can I look after my employees a lot better? And I think that's a really important thing that we explore through this. So that was just a real introduction. Really excited. We have a phenomenal panel today. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate it. So as Matt says, we have a number of people dialing in for the first time today, and welcome to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. Protiviti is a change management consultancy. A lot of you may be familiar with this, a lot of you won't be, but we focus on technology, risk and internal audit, but we specialize in managing the risks in your businesses and changing your business and helping you face the future with confidence. And it's really then in collaboration with Matt and his team and Robert Half that we brought this wide audience here today. And you have people from a wide range of industries, from financial services to charities to manufacturing to food, public sector, retail, technology, many others, as well as sport. And really it's that diversity that we've always tried to foster within these forums we hope is useful to you. Before we kick off, just a little bit on forum logistics. As I say every week, this is your forum. It's nothing without you. So please make sure that you contribute. Ask your perspectives, ask your questions, disagree or agree with the panelists, but give your points of view. Don't be shy. You can ask those questions through speaking up, or when I open questions to the floor, or as many of you prefer, please use the chat function in Teams, or raise your hand if you want me to come to you. For those of you who don't use Teams that often, you can highlight the chat function if just kind of hovering over the bottom of Teams, and then just type your question in there. We're aware of many of you be dialing in on the phone. If you're dialing on the phone and you wish to unmute yourself, please press *6, and that should do the trick. For others of you, you will notice that from time to time you have been muted as we just hit a mute all function to minimize the background noise. So please just unmute yourselves if you wish to say anything. Lastly, we'll be having as normal an after party. So just after 9 o'clock, we'll have just more informal discussion with as many of you who are able to stay on. So please feel free to do that and just join in the debates, meet more of each other and so on. So very pleased if you can join that as well. So quick introductions to our panelists, many of whom you will know. Firstly, we have John Dutton. Delighted that John can join us today. John is the Chief Executive of the Rugby League World Cup 2021. He's been involved in the project since inception in late 2015, having successfully led the bid for the tournament and secured over 25 million of government funding. John brings over 25 years of experience in the sports industry, having previously worked for the Rugby Football League as Director of Projects and People, the PGA European Golf Tour, Manchester Football Association, including as a comment to UEFA, and was Director of Readiness for the Tour de France Grand Depart in 2014. He was also Tournament Director for the last Rugby League Four Nations tournament in 2016, and delighted that he can join us today. Next, I'd like to introduce Brendan Taylor. Brendan is actually dialing in from his wife's computer this morning, so you'll see that his name is coming up as Nicola Taylor, but I assure you it is Brendan. Brendan is Executive Vice President and Head of Golf at Wasserman Media Group. Wasserman is a sports marketing and talent management company, managing athletes across a large number of sports. They are global leaders in golf with a number of top-ranked professionals across the tours in their team. Brendan's been with Wasserman for over 10 years and oversees their golf business in EMEA, in Europe, Middle East and Africa. He was previously with IMG, where again he looked after some of their top golfing stars. And again, delighted that Brendan can join us today. Next is Liz Johnson. Very excited to have Liz Johnson on our panel today. Liz will be a familiar face and name to many of you. You'll have seen her as a sports commentator and pundit on the BBC and Channel 4. Before her television career, Liz had a tremendously successful swimming career and is one of the select few in the British para swimming team to have won gold medals at the Paralympics, World Championships and European Championships. In 2018, Liz set up her own company, The Ability People, aimed at recruiting disabled people beside able-bodied people in the workplace to enable disabled people to be equals and to help companies create a true culture of equality. Again, Liz, thank you very much for joining us today. Next, Derek Redmond. For many of you, Derek will need no introduction. During his athletic career, Derek held the British record for the 400-meter sprint and won gold medals in the 4x400 meters at the World Championships and European Championships. Derek is a two-time Olympian for Team GB, and a number of you remember the moment in 1992 when his hamstring tore and he was helped to the finish by his father, Jim. A moment of human spirit and courage that's been celebrated many times. Derek has also played professional basketball for the Birmingham Bullets after retiring, and after retiring from sport, he's become a motivational, inspirational keynote speaker, as well as a performance coach. So, Derek, once again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And then we've got Nick Fenton-Wells. Nick joins us as our panelist today. And Nick, thank you very much for doing so. Nick is a team manager at Bristol Bears Rugby, who play in England's top division of rugby. Nick had a 10-year professional playing career in which he spent his last 3 years at Bristol. He was Premiership Community Player of the Year following the 2018-2019 campaign for his outstanding contribution to the club's charity programmes, and he also runs his own sports business. I'm delighted to say that Nick has worked with Matt and his team and Robert Half over the years, and we're delighted to welcome Nick to our forum today. So thank you, Nick, for joining us. So I'll move on to our questions then. John, if I could turn first to you, please. John, you've been leading the planning and organisation for the 2021 Rugby League World Cup for over 5 years, and you still have significant uncertainty around what lies ahead. Can you just give our attendees today some insight into what are the key challenges that you still have to address and how you've adapted your organisation to be ready for these, please?
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. So yes, our journey began way back in 2015 when we had a conversation with the UK government about funding support. What followed was a bid process, setting up a company, putting a board in place, and gradually growing our team. We are trying to do something very different. We're staging 3 tournaments together: the men's, women's, and wheelchair tournaments, with a huge drive towards equality. We've got a very big tournament, 61 games, and indeed at 8 p.m. This morning we announced that the BBC will cover every minute of every game live. So a really significant announcement for us this morning. In terms of the challenges, we've still got plenty of time, just under 500 days to go. But yeah, uncertainty surrounds us all. Some of the things that we've had to do recently is push back our ticketing timeline. So we were already due to be on sale, and we've pushed that back. Clearly, not having the ability for people to come into a stadium and enjoy live sport in the normal way is one of our considerations around consumer confidence. So as a board, as an executive team, we've adopted 6 guiding principles. So we are a values-led organisation. We have a behaviour framework, but the guiding principles for us at the moment are to be calm and make rational decisions. It's very easy for us to start to panic and make irrational decisions when actually time is on our side. We are an agile organisation, and we've had a great deal of agility. We've carried on recruitment. We've onboarded 6 people during lockdown, and people have adopted to that very, very well, very easily. And I guess that's what comes with organising a major global sporting tournament. We've also tried to be responsible. We've thought a lot about our messaging. This was always a period where we were going to be very busy, very active, and clearly with a global pandemic crisis, we've had to think about our positioning. One of the things we did right at the start of lockdown is make a gesture to NHS staff and key workers by saying that the first 20,021 tickets will be made available to show our thanks for their incredible work. One of the other things we've tried to be is absolutely positive. We hope that when we all come through this, we can give people some hope, some optimism, and our strapline, our new brand, is the power of together, and that is probably never more relevant now than it has been. We go to live sport as a social occasion with our family, with our friends, and we want to hopefully create that in 2021, October and November next year, and give people something to look forward to. So managing a major global sporting event, first of all, is an absolute privilege. Secondly, it was always going to be a challenge, not least having the scale that we have. But of course, the COVID crisis has brought just an added layer of complexity. So all of those things and many more, Paul, but very happy to, as we go through the morning, take any questions and very much talk about the important things that are at the heart of our tournament, our inclusivity, men, women and wheelchair athletes together for the first time, and also our social impact programme, making a positive impact on people's lives and delivering something more tangible than simply a major global sporting event.
John, thank you very much for that. Some questions coming through. I can see one from one of my Australian colleagues asking you who's going to win the next Rugby World Cup. So we know who it won't be, but we'll leave that one for now. But John, no, thank you very much for that. I'd like just to maybe just extend that business angle then to Brendan from Wasserman, because I think, John, there's some threads there that will resonate with Brendan as well, because Brendan, you and your team at Wasserman represent and manage some of the top flight golfers and sports people in the world. For you, just kind of reflecting on some of what John said there, what do the next few months look like from you from a business perspective in terms of the golf tours opening up and how Wasserman's been adapting to the now as well as the future?
Yeah, well, thank you, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me on this morning. Appreciate it. You talk about adapting. I mean, technology has been one of the things we've had to adapt to, and I apologize. I failed this morning on my laptop, so hence why I'm on my wife's. But it was a very worrying time at the beginning of lockdown. Wasserman are involved in 3 key areas, talent management being one, brands being another, and properties. And sport closed down, as we all know, so it was a very worrying and challenging time. But the key things were good leadership, and right at the very top with Casey Wasserman, we've got a fantastic leader, and he communicated, had global calls once a week, and we had twice weekly global golf calls. So communication in the early days and good leadership was key. And in terms of the golf tours now opening up, golf as a sport has got an opportunity. It's the first sport to come back. The PGA Tour now has been back playing for 4 weeks, and there's stringent, obviously, testing procedures and safety procedures around that. The European Tour has got an opportunity to sort of learn from the PGA Tour. It is coming back actually next week with the first event in Austria. And then we'll have a second event in Austria and then 6 in the UK swing. So there's been obviously a lot of talks with the medical specialists about how we keep the players safe. And there's certain measures that have been put in place in terms of no support staff. It's just a very minimal team within the bubbles to compete. But it's good to see the sport back. I think it's a good product from a television perspective, and I think people are keen for sport to be back, and so yeah, it's an opportunity for us within that. And in terms of some of the stories that our players faced through lockdown, just going back obviously to when it all happened, we had 3 different sort of buckets, if you like. Some of the professionals had indoor studios and gyms, and they maintained a high level of kind of practice and performance to get themselves ready for when the tours were going to come back. We had some other clients who just thought this was a perfect opportunity to have a break because they're traveling so much. This was the first real opportunity to spend some time with young families, and they just put their clubs down. And somebody, like Andy Sullivan, for example, did that, and now is just starting to build back up, looking forward to these events he's going to be playing in. And then we had one of our female clients, like Incy Mehmet, who was, her tournament schedule shut down, and she was also doing some media work with Sky Sports, and that shut down. And Incy actually had to go out there and find a job, and she ended up in a testing facility for COVID-19. So very, very different stories across, different individuals. It's been an interesting time, but we're now positively looking forward to getting the professional golf tours back up and running, and all of our clients back out there and playing golf.
Fantastic. Brendan, thank you very much for that. A question to both you and to John, or a couple of questions to both you and to John, just really reflecting what's coming through on the chat. Firstly, around crowds and your expectation, I guess, particularly from your perspective, John, around the number of crowds. How are you planning for that in 2021 at the minute? And also then, and maybe more relevant for yourself, Brendan, around sponsorship. How supportive has sponsors been through this period as sports closed down? Maybe, John, if I could turn to you first with that.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. I mean, we're working hand in hand with the Rugby Football League. Obviously, the focus very much is about getting sport back, and then the ramp up through gradually introducing crowds and hopefully back to sport as we know it. So to put in context, we've got 500 days to go. I couldn't imagine playing a tournament, certainly not behind closed doors. Our business model really doesn't support that. And secondly, whatever physical social distancing might look like. So we're very hopeful. It goes back to the start of uncertainty. It's very hard to plan with some certainty around what we would hope, what our plans have been for the last 5 years. So things like vaccine, mass social gatherings, international travel, all of those things that are environmental factors that we cannot control. So very much our approach has been to control the controllables, to plan when we go on sale in September that we will be ramping up to full audiences. And I guess it's a bit like the Olympic conundrum at the moment. I really couldn't imagine the Olympics and Paralympics not being staged in front of people, because that very much is the very essence of what the Olympics and Paralympics are about. And the same for this global tournament. It's about bringing people together. So we will have to face undoubtedly some more challenges as we move forward. If we can get some more certainty, then that obviously will be incredibly helpful.
John, thank you. Brendan, a quick word on sponsors?
Yeah, from a sponsor's perspective, I mean, obviously there's two kinds of sponsors. One is on the player side of things, and then the other side is the event. And they've had similar challenges. From the events perspective, just not having crowds in there and not having the ability to, interact with the audience on site has been very, very different. Also from an economic model, they're losing out on all of the hospitality revenue and food and beverage revenue. However, there is still the television product. So the title sponsors of those PGA Tour events, decided to go forward, in order to get their brand out there. And I think it's an important time for companies to continue, communicating with their client base. And sport has always been, a very powerful tool to do that, and remains so. But certainly the messaging in and around, the traditional title sponsorship, and indeed a player sponsorship, has had to be changed. Just to be aware of the certain times at the moment. But I think what sport does bring for brands is that opportunity to communicate, and whether that's through the power of the individual, and we've done a lot of sort of webinars like this. So Victor Hovland is one of our clients, the young Norwegian player playing on the PGA Tour. One of his partners is Cisco, and they were one of the first to actually get Victor and some of their other ambassadors onto a webinar to do a communication like this, and really talk about what they were going through, to help give people a perspective of what a professional athlete would go through, which is similar to what businesses and business people are going through.
Absolutely. Brendan, thank you very much for that. A good question from Neil, and I'll come back, Neil, to your question around team spirit, if that's okay in a moment, because that's really a theme that I think we're going to begin to touch on now. I'd like to bring in Liz and Derek and also Nick around this, but I think really kind of facing or talking now a little bit about how we adapt in the face of adversity. Athletes, like business people, often face very real setbacks, whether it's something like the closure of a training pool, a track, a golf course, or the delay of the 2020 Olympics. And indeed, Brendan, as you alluded to, sometimes the loss of sponsorship or an injury. Liz, if I can come to you first, what's the elite athlete mindset required for dealing with those setbacks, and what can we as individuals as well as business leaders learn from sports people facing this kind of adversity at this time?
I think the mindset sits for anybody who wants success, and ultimately that's why there's so many similarities between athletes and businesses, and there's such a synergy in the way that successful people think, is because you need to be motivated, and we all talk about resilience, it's in the title of the webinar, but ultimately you need to work out how you can be in an individual way, because what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And so I think as athletes, it happens you don't even realize you're doing it. And since I've stepped away from being an athlete and worked a lot more in the business world, that's what I've realized, is actually sometimes you're talking about things you didn't even realize they were happening. So it's about being able to rationalize things and knowing that motivation comes from your end goal, but actually there's so much in this world you can't control. And John said control the controllables when he was talking about how he's dealing with his current situation. And as a young athlete, you get told that all the time, and you're like, yeah, whatever, but how can I fix it? And the reality is you can't fix everything, but you can prepare yourself as best possible to deal with whatever comes your way. And I think that is what we've all experienced during this pandemic, especially, is that even if you were so good and you were top of your game, things got thrown in, and all of a sudden you had to readjust your thinking, readjust the way you operate. And as athletes, all of those things that can potentially sidetrack or sideline your career that you mentioned, Paul, are relevant all the time. You're only ever a day away from something going wrong. And every time you get, for me, it was obviously a swimmer, every time I got in the water, whether it be training or to compete, that could very much have been my last interaction with the swimming pool in an elite capacity. And so you give yourself the best opportunity, but also I think where it lines up significantly with businesses is actually realizing that you're not alone and you can't do everything by yourself. And as a swimmer, that was something I learned as I got older and things started to go wrong, because one of the reasons I thought I loved swimming was because it was all on me. And that meant that if I got it wrong, I only had myself to blame. But actually, when I had an injury, I suddenly realized that I needed to include everybody within my team, because you need different perspectives in order to sometimes give you clarity, because sometimes you can be so focused on the goal and so in a bubble that you lose the ability to rationalize. And that's not a weakness. It's just because you're so motivated and so focused on trying to achieve and deliver the end goal, for whether it be a gold medal or whether it be put on the biggest tournament in the world, whatever it is. And so I think Tokyo 2020 being postponed has affected the majority of the world, because even if you're not a potential Olympic or Paralympic athlete, the most people tune into that championship at some point to watch it or resonate with it. And so I think it's made people realize that even when you look at people that you think have got it all together and things go their way and they are the best of the best, there are certain things that are out of everybody's control. And so I think that has taught us all that we need to have that agile way of thinking, and we need to be able to move. It's not a one-size-fits-all policy, and in a workplace that is particularly important, because you would hope that everybody in your organization working with you is there because they have the same values, the same beliefs, but they don't necessarily have the same overall desires. And it's important to remember that you can work towards an overall goal. So again, go back to my gold medal, but my physio and my nutritionist, they had a different role in it to me. but it still mattered as much to them as it did to me. And actually, if without them, I wouldn't have been able to achieve. So I think it's that the lesson is, don't focus on the things you can't control. Be prepared and give yourself the best chance so that when something does come at you, you're as equipped as possible to react and still achieve your end goal or work towards that end goal, but maybe not within restrictions that people have placed upon you, because they can be changed. I think that's pretty much what I was going to say.
Liz, thank you ever so much for that. Derek, can I bring you in on this? Your thoughts around, managing adversity, managing disruption. What lessons do you think, from your experience in the world of sport, should business people take from that and adapt to their new reality here?
It's a huge question, and this is a huge subject. For many years, we've all, a lot of people have been saying that there is a huge correlation between sport and business, which obviously there is. I wrote a book 2 years ago called Sport is a Business and Business is a Sport, because I didn't see the difference between taking part in either. And as I always say, the mindset of a successful sportsman is no different to the mindset of a successful business person. And when people say to me, how did you make that transition from sport to business? I say I didn't need to make a transition. I just changed events. And that's kind of how I, look at things. But when we sort of bring it to today and the position we all find ourselves in, there are a million things that can be done and sort of explained and shared from the people from the world of sport into the world of business, as Liz has already alluded to in some cases. But I think one of the things for me at the moment is that ability to adapt, and as John and Liz repeated about controlling the controllables. I have a module in one of my programs called Controlling the Controllables in an Uncontrollable World. I know there's too many words controllable in there, but you get the gist of it. And sometimes it's taken away the problem and focusing on what and concentrating on what you can focus on. And in business terms, it's there's no point in wasting time, effort, money and resources on things that actually you don't have any control over. So one of the things that I've been working on during this pandemic, and it's a word that's been used a hell of a lot, and that is the word adapt. People have been saying, oh, we need to adapt, and people are adapting. And I've come up with something that I'm starting to use now, which is called my ADAPT model. And I use the word adapt as a bit of an acronym. So the A, which to me is possibly the most important one, the first A, and that's the one of acceptance. Whether you're in sport, whether you're in business, is accepting the situation you're in. I'm sure Nick, I'm sure Liz, I'm sure anybody else who's competed at any sort of level in sport, when you get that conversation with, I don't know, somebody from the medical field, your team manager, to say, thanks, Nick, you've had a brilliant career, but we're going to let you go. And you think, well, hold on, I've got a couple of more years left in me. Now, you can fight that as much as you want. And 99.999% chance that coach is not going to reverse his or her decision, because it would have been a tough decision to come to that into the first place. So, and I'm not picking on you here, Nick, because you're most probably bigger than me anyway. But, if Nick's career has sort of come to a bit of an end, and the coach has decided we want to take on a younger player and move Nick to one side, Nick can kind of fight against that. Or if, I don't know, for Liz, maybe she's got a career-ending injury and somebody on her medical team says, Liz, that is it. It's over. You can fight it, and you might, in Nick's case, you might be able to find another season in maybe a division or two divisions lower. In Liz's case, you might be able to swim, but at a much lower level, and not, we've got to accept these things. Once you accept it, then you can kind of begin to move on. So to me, acceptance is the most important thing. And then the D is direction. What direction are we going to take? What am I going to do? Am I going to stay within my sport? Am I going to completely change direction? What does that look like? Can I go and get extra medical health? Can I go and try out for other teams? Whatever the case may be. Then there's other alternatives, which is the next A. What alternatives are there out there for me? Again, whether that's in your sport, whether it's staying in your sport, whether it's moving into a completely different career. Then the P is for planning, kind of putting a bit of a plan together on how now this is gonna look. And then the final T really is for transition, going from that plan and putting that plan into into action and transitioning into whatever that kind of new role is. And unfortunately, this isn't something that you do just once. You know, having had 17 operations in my sporting career, and possibly missed more major championships that I'd been picked for than I competed in, you know, one of the things that I found myself doing was forever having to go through this process, because it's a bit of a circle. And you know, you have a bit of an injury, you accept it, you know, you change direction, you look at the alternatives, you plan, you transition. So that could be the type of training I'm doing, whether it's no longer on the track and going into the pool, whether it's delaying my season, whatever the case may be. Then you get back on track, and then something else might happen. You might actually be not performing at the level that you want to be. You might be running too quick too soon. These are all things that you know, that come into it. I know in business terms, no one can make too much money too soon, but certainly in sport, if you're trying to peak for an Olympic Games, you don't want to be peaking too early. So there's lots of things that can happen. And I think one of the things that we, as in sportsmen and women, really do well is we manage to adapt to the situation that we're in, because actually we have no choice to. And it's the same situation as we find ourselves in 2020. We have no choice but to react to this decision. So there's no point complaining about it, no point arguing about it, no point trying to force against this, push against this. It's here. So let's accept it and then take the next step and move on. Sounds a bit harsh, but it is the reality that we find ourselves in.
Derek, thank you so much for that. I think it's only fair to let Nick come back onto that. So and Nick, I'd like to bring you in, because I think you will have seen maybe in the sidebar that there've been a couple of questions around team spirit and mental health, and I'd like to kind of weave those into here as well, because you know, many business leaders here on this call at the minute are making decisions about bringing people back from furlough. Similar at Bristol Bears, you must be beginning to mobilize your team as team manager for games. And when you do that, you need your players to come back and be at the top of their game very quickly. How do you nurture that team spirit to create that? How do you prepare them mentally to be in the right space to play their best after having been off for so long? Because I'm sure there's a lot of parallels in that to how people on this call are managing teams coming back, or even the day-to-day you know, motivation that their team members have.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everybody for having me on. Just to follow on from Liz and Dirk, outstanding and very similar parallels between individual sports and team sports. Firstly, what Liz mentioned about professional sports people being highly self-motivated. You know, we have a lot of that within our squad. So when COVID, the pandemic hit, and you know, there was the lockdown was introduced, we kind of had to take what Derek spoke about and use the adapt model, so to speak, and understand the direction that we were going in. There were a lot of things that took place within rugby. It was a very, very uncertain future for us. We didn't know what was going to happen with the rest of the season. We didn't know if we were going to go into the following season. There were a lot of variables that were thrown at us that we needed to plan for. So I saw there was a question about mental health, and I think that one of the most interesting things is that with highly motivated individuals, it's not necessarily about keeping them physically fit, but it's about keeping them mentally fit during a time of such uncertainty. And what it took was being able to understand each individual for who they were within the team environment, because when we were coming into training, there were a number of physical markers that players would fill out before we started a day. And often what you'd find is if those physical markers were down, there could be something that would be attributed to mental stress or anxiety or whatever it might have been. Whereas we didn't necessarily have that opportunity to go and put the proverbial arm around the shoulder. We needed to check in virtually, and how we managed that was kind of reliant on all the staff who were kept as a skeleton staff and weren't furloughed. So making sure that we're checking in with everyone as regularly as possible, and teams, heads of departments, etc., looking in on each individual staff member, but each player too, was so important for us because we knew that they would get the work done. As Liz mentioned, highly self-motivated individuals. So they had the necessary tools and equipment to keep physically fit. But what were they doing to keep mentally fit? What were they doing to look after themselves mentally was probably the biggest challenge. So we had social interactions and Zoom calls and things like that we continued to do just to make sure that everybody checked in and that basically that everybody felt like they were still a part of the team. What you find in rugby is that there's what we call the change room, and it's not necessarily where you just go and get changed. It's where all the banter happens. It's those relationships, the war stories. It's where the camaraderie and the culture is really built within a squad. And when you take that away from a group of players who are so used to being involved in a social environment that get lifted by each other and teammates training hard and pushing each other on a daily basis, where do they find that when they're training on their own? So it was a case of trying to check in as regularly as possible, but making sure that we were taking the necessary steps to not necessarily overload them with learning, analysis, and physical training, but more to just check in with them socially. So understand where they were interacting with one another virtually, how we could get them involved virtually. So it would be quizzes. Every team meeting that we had, it would be a chance for an individual to tell someone about what book they'd read or what series they'd watched, or just giving them small little tasks so that they could go away and compare notes and sort of spend time interacting away from the rugby environment when they didn't know that when they were going to possibly compete again. So just following on from Derek's ADAPT model, it was about accepting what had happened, players and staff being placed on furlough, and then understanding the direction that we needed to go in. So how do you keep people motivated to train, not knowing when the next game is going to be, was crucial for us. And I think a lot of that came from the direction of the club and the way that Bristol Bears is going and the direction that they're moving in, which is fantastic because we know at the end of it, we're going to come out of the pandemic at some point. We just didn't know exactly when. So understanding that we still needed to do the work was crucial, and the players bought into that massively. So from a physical perspective, it wasn't necessarily now we're seeing the transition and boys coming in. You actually see that the majority of the squad all put in the work during the time that they're in lockdown, and that was so crucial for us. And then just the next day is the alternatives that Derek spoke about, and what were the alternatives? Well, in lockdown, we needed to significantly plan what the physical would look like, but we needed to, as I said, adapt and make changes to how we looked after the players mentally. So. Yeah. Thankfully, prior to lockdown, we had a whole host of people doing mental health first aiders courses, and that allowed people to interact with one another.
Nick, that's fantastic. Sorry. And I think that will really resonate with those that, particularly were asking around just how you manage that mental health, how you nurture that team spirit that's so important, both on the sports field as well as in the workplace as well. Derek, I do hope you've copyrighted the ADAPT model, because there's a lot of fans now who like it. And thank you for summarising it in the sidebar. That's very, very useful.
I didn't actually. Somebody else did, but I will be copyrighting and suing.
Yeah, you got to be quick. Yeah.
To be honest with you, it's stuff that I've been working on, and it's interesting what Nick was just saying. One of the things that I did during this whole lockdown was look at what I can do, and I've had to adapt, as we all have, and my IT abilities have gone up somewhat, and my knowledge has gone up, as all of us had. And actually, why? Because we had no choice.
No,
and
absolutely.
a lot of the times, again, if you look at sports, and you look at any top class sportsman or woman, sometimes we tend to perform at our best when we're up against it, i.e. Olympic final, World Championship final, when it really matters. That's when the cream really rises to the top, because that's when you have to really dig deep within and pull out that performance. Yeah. And again, that's what we're kind of doing.
No, Derek, no, I think it really resonates, and I think that's fantastic to see. I'd like to, in the interest of time, I'd like to move on to a couple of other topics that I think are very, very important here. The first one being around the importance of diversity in sport, and the secondly being around sport and mental well-being. And Liz, maybe if I can just turn to you first of all. We've heard a lot today around, or we've heard a lot over the weeks from a business context about the importance of around diversity, around how you create high-performing teams by being very inclusive around that and nurturing a spirit of innovation, particularly at times like this. Can you give us your thoughts around that, around the importance of diversity and how you do indeed successfully nurture that in teams?
I think it's a really interesting topic because everybody knows that it's important and it's the correct thing to do, but sometimes people don't know where to start or exactly why it's happening. But I think actually what all the other guests have said this morning, you bring it all together, and simply there's strength in difference, and being different, having different minds and different attitudes, working on the same project, whatever that project looks like, gives you a competitive advantage over your competitors, because you have the ability to look at things a different way. And Nick touched upon it a lot, and actually mental well-being is so important, because the majority of the time the people that you've employed within your workforce or within your sports teams are there because they possess the skill to do what they've been employed to do very, very well. But where diversity comes in, and inclusion and that authentic idea of normalizing differences, is it provides an environment and a platform for people to be most comfortable and work with what enables them to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that's the same whether it be in sport or in the workplace, or even at home in your family life. And it also, if your mental well-being is good, you're stronger to deal with things that feel like they're going against you. And like I've read in the chat bar, that some people have had to make the decision to stay away from their families and go into a working environment. And it, for want of a better phrase, it sucks. It's not fair, it's not right, and you see other people, and there's nothing you can do about it. But if your mental well-being is able to be in a good place and you're supported in that way, then ultimately it makes things more bearable, it makes things more digestible, and it makes you value what you're doing, but focus on the light at the end of the tunnel. Because as Nick said, we know that we will leave the pandemic at some point, but we don't know when, we don't know in what order, and we don't know what the world will look like afterwards. And I think it is about being agile enough to appreciate that every individual is different, every individual has different needs, and every individual will be reacting to these situations very, very differently. And it's just about humanizing the whole process and appreciating and empathizing that we're a community and everybody is going through this together. But you can't do that if you don't have diversity, because if everybody thinks the same and everybody is being affected by the same issue at the same time, then you're all going to be feeling the same emotions and beating the same drum. And so actually you need diversity to give you strength, which is what I started with. So that's what I'll finish with.
But I think that's the message. And John, if I can come back to you maybe, because I think, looking at, you're launching the first ever Rugby League World Cup that has the 3 tournaments, the men's, women's, the wheelchair. But as you said, you've embraced a together brand during this time. So what Liz says must be very central to how you've approached your branding and also your team as well at this time.
Yeah, Liz was definitely resonated. I mean, some of the things that we've done, I'm a firm believer in actions speak louder than words. So at the start, saying we're going to be an inclusive tournament, we had to take some action. We've developed equal participation fees for the men's, women's and wheelchair athletes. Everyone will get the same. We've introduced prize money in our women's tournament for the first time ever. And we've also listened to the athletes and revised our women's tournament to increase the number of days in between the games for turnaround for player welfare aspects. But the conversation about diversity has made us reflect. So we've got a really diverse tournament. We have Jamaica, Brazil, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, all playing and bringing their incredible culture and diversity. As a local organising committee, it's made us think about how diverse we are and about our approach to developing diversity. So sometimes you just got to stick your hand up and say what we're doing isn't good enough, and we have reflected. And hopefully some of the things we'll do, proportionate to being a tournament, being a pop-up company, we can get that right. But just on mental resilience, we've got an opportunity to make a difference. So one of our biggest programs, we introduced a mental fitness charter at the start of the year. Again, a statement about what we were going to do, and then we've now backed that up by working with the charity, looking at what is simply a crisis amongst young men in particular. In suicide, and suicide rates have unfortunately increased during this period. So we found some funding to deliver to 8,000 young people mental fitness and resilience linked to our tournament and what we really believe and stand for. So everything that Liz has said is absolutely spot on. Actions speak far louder than words, and having the ability to stage a tournament is just not good enough. Playing the games is just not good enough. This is about genuinely making a difference and leaving a footprint behind.
No, we hear that loud and clear, John. That's fantastic to hear. So, Brendan, I wonder if I can just keep the theme going around sport and mental well-being, and just come back to you on that to reflect on that. I mean, sport is obviously central to what you do at Wasman. It's everything you do. It's what you live for. Going forward, how do we as employers, do you think, better invest in the health and well-being of our own teams and people at this time?
Sure. Well, I just wanted to share a story that was a personal one for me and my team. At the beginning, it was a lot of firefighting and sort of reevaluating, the business and the business plan. And I quickly realized, that was a lot of sort of negativity, and I needed to refocus and give me and my team something positive to really focus on. And it covers, the ADAPT model that Derek was talking about, and also a little bit on the inclusion side as well. But I foresaw there was going to be a period where recreational golf was allowed under social distancing rules, and professional tours coming back. And I thought if in that period, if we could put on a tournament that gave our UK-based professionals an opportunity to compete, but also bring in amateurs to play with them, and we could raise money for good causes. All charities have suffered through this time, and the original thought was to do it for NHS charities together, but there was such an overwhelming response and fantastic response from the country. With that, we thought we'd do it for two smaller charities, and my wife's always worked in that sector, and she gave me sort of a short list, and we did it for the Rainbow Trust, who had a COVID-19 emergency appeal, and then Dan's Fund, which was a charity that was associated with my local golf club. And last Thursday, me and my team are just on the player management side, so we don't really do event management. As a company, we do, but I wanted my team to actually change their focus and do something different outside of their comfort zone, because player management, other than checking in with our clients on their well-being, it had really, shut down. So I wanted to give us all a focus to do something challenging and different. And for 12 weeks, we were heavily focused on putting on this event, and we were delighted that it all came off smoothly last Thursday. And we had some of the world's best players, male, female, and the EDGA players, which is the European Disabled Golf Association. We had the world number one professional and world number one amateur playing. And it was a fantastic event, and the fundraising amount is over 50,000 now for the two small charities, and that was something really, really positive for us all to focus on, and has now led us into the period where we're really now back into our day job, if you like, which is analysing the get back to golf route for the professional tours, and but it was a real eye-opener and a real positive thing to be involved with. And from the mental well-being side, all of the team, it said it's given them a significant lift. Me personally, it gave me a significant lift as well, and kind of changed away from just the firefighting that we had to do in the early stages.
So thank you very much there, Brendan. Just in the interest of time then, as we begin to wrap this up, and as I said, we will keep the lines open afterwards, but there's a question coming in here, I think, around what are the lasting positives that will remain with us over this time? And I think, Derek, using your ADAPT model, there are, and a lot of what you said as well, Liz, I think, to find those positives and to control the controllables is so important. Maybe if I could start with you, Nick, from a player that, or from a team manager that has a bunch of players here on the front line almost of adapting to this. Just very quick thoughts, and I'll go around all our panelists. What are the positives that you and your team can take away from this period? What have you learned?
Well, self-motivation is huge, and that people they crave that physical interaction. So being at home is great, but also being in the office is something that is so crucial for people to interact and just get that social element of work too. So but we can do both.
Okay. Thank you for that, Derek.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one of them for me is communication. We have, as we've been isolated, one of the things that we've worked on a hell of a lot over the last 101 days now, I'm told we've been in lockdown, is that ability to communicate. And, that's one of the most important things, not only for keeping teams sort of linked together in one way, but also for the mental health side, is having that ability to talk to people and not just talk at them, but listen to them, listen to what they're saying. And so for me, one of the big things is communication, with all these fantastic ways now that we are able to communicate. I mean, I don't know about anybody else on here. I've had more Microsoft Teams and Zoom calls in the last and I have done in the last 6 years. It's unbelievable. Now when people say, I'm going to give you a call, you don't say, all right, I'll expect a call. You say, is that on Zoom or on the phone? Because now it's almost old fashioned to do it on the telephone. That's number one. Number two for me is the ability to evolve. We've all managed to evolve in certain ways. We've all managed to find bits of equipment around the house to be able to exercise, for argument's sake. And I'm not just talking your average keep fitter. I'm talking about Olympic standard and world-class athletes. Men and women, they've found ways and worked around ways that they can still stay in shape. We heard with, from golfers either having the facility, having a simulator in their, on their property or whatever. I mean, I bought one of these cheap golf nets and kept on shanking it into my neighbour's garden, but we won't go into that. But we have been able to, to adapt. And I think there are two things that are going to stay with us. Interestingly enough, the amount of companies and businesses that I've been talking to and working with who are now saying, you know what, we're going to allow a lot of our staff to continue working from home, because one, their quality of life has gone up, their productivity has gone up. And when this first started, everybody thought, oh, how are we going to police them, all going to be Skyping? But actually the productivity has gone up, and they've got a better quality of life. And so there's two simple things that I think that's come out of this situation that I think will continue and will follow forward.
Thank you, Derek. Liz?
Can you be very concise? Can you just summarize the question again?
Of course. So what are the things that what are the things that we'll take from these last 10 weeks? 10 weeks. The last 16 weeks. What are the benefits we're going to take going forward?
I think the benefits are that we realize that people can work outside of the constricted perceived norms. And so that is a huge benefit. And to build on what both Nick and Derek said, people have shown their ability to be strong and adapt and versatile. But one thing to be cautious of is just because we can work differently, not everybody will want to. And it's about, again, knowing, being aware of what works for each individual. But I think more than anything, hopefully, individuals have realized what works best for them, because for so long, even people in charge have got used to working in specific ways, and actually you can have it all in moderation. And I don't know what everybody else thinks on the call, but actually I haven't spoken to anybody that hasn't gained a single positive thing from lockdown. And I could relist what the other guys have said, but there's no need. So so for me, I think it would be that actually to be aware that giving people the opportunity, whether it's been thrust upon them or whether they've taken it because they can, but giving the opportunity to people to exercise their way of doing things has actually shown us so much more about individuals that we spend time with and work with every day that we would have known nothing about prior to this lockdown.
Thank you ever so much, Liz. John, very quick perspectives, and then I'll come to you, Brendan, just to wrap us up.
Yeah, we're more productive and efficient than ever before, but it's about striking a balance. As Derek said, we've introduced on Wednesday afternoons no Zoom or team calls, just to give people a midweek break from what has been pretty relentless.
Okay. Look, Brendan, I do apologise. I'm going to wrap it up there because we are at time. Hopefully, people will be able to stay into our after party. As I say, this isn't the end, but we'll keep the lines open, and so please hang around for that if you can. Next week, next Thursday, 9th of July, we're very excited to be kind of extending a lot of topics that Liz has spoken to and others here around diversity and inclusion in the workplace. That is our theme for next week. It's been important to so many of our panels so far that we've had, so we want to continue into next week and focus on that. I'd really like to thank all of today's panelists for giving up their time. We've been very excited about holding this, and we're very, very grateful for you all joining us and sharing your time and your perspectives. So thank you for that. Thank you also to our attendees and for all the questions coming through. I'm sorry if I didn't get through to all of them as normal, but hopefully we answered most of them. Again, we sincerely hope this forum has been useful to you, and you can apply some of the thoughts you've heard today to your own businesses. So on behalf of Protiviti and Robert Half, I'd like to extend my best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. And hopefully we'll keep the conversation going now. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So.
Great job, panelists. Thank you, everyone. There's been so much
excellent.
Yeah, so many comments in the chat bar on the side this week. Liz, I think you had there were some comments about the mental wellness issue has come up again, and it's clearly resonating with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just do a quick check here how many we have, because I know a lot of people have to dial off at 9 o'clock, but it's still got 80 people. So I mean, this is designed just to be a lot more kind of free flowing, asking what you want. I can see a lot of other people on screen now. Would anyone like to unmute themselves, stick their hand up, ask a question to any of our panelists?
Paul, it's Matt. Can I just ask a question to Brendan? What's your view as an avid golfer? What's your view on the Ryder Cup?
Yeah, I think the Ryder Cup, more than any golf tournament, has got to have fans. I mean, the product that we talked about television-wise, looking at something through a screen, a regular PGA Tour event, it doesn't sort of seem much different through the television. But the Ryder Cup, I just don't think would be the same without fans. I mean, from a player's perspective, you see some of the emotions, that they go through at the Ryder Cup, which is greater than any other tournament they've ever played in. And to do that without the fans there, I think would just be, it wouldn't seem right to me. And I think the rumours are that it will be postponed a year, and I think that would be the right call. I mean, it was interesting. Andy Sullivan is one of our players, and he was telling a funny story at the charity day last Thursday. He knew for months he was going to partner Rory in that opening 4-ball against Mickelson and Ricky Fowler. And he was nervous, but Rory was saying, look, guys can't put the ball on the tee peg on the first tee. He said, that's how nervous everybody gets. Yeah. So Andy was like getting all sort of worked up, but he went on the driving range and flushed it. And he's walking up to the first tee, and it's a cauldron there around the first tee. And Rory said to him, don't forget, Andy, some guys can't get the ball on the peg. And he suddenly was like, whoa. And then he bent down and he managed to get it in. And then he said, you know what? Because I'd done that, all the nerves left me. And then he hit a great one down the first. But imagine that without any fans there, it just wouldn't be the same. And imagine all the great performances that, Poulter, for example, has delivered, for Team Europe. And that's driven by fans being there. So for me, I know there's the commercial sort of reasons why people would, and, the PGA of America and the European Tour would want to try and get it played. But for me, it wouldn't be the same without the fans being there.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Brilliant.
Absolutely. So we still got, I think, about 50 people on. Who wants to ask a question? Anyone want to unmute themselves and?
Hi, Derek. It's Stephen here. Just a quick question on your ADAPT model. I do like it. I'm very much, and I've written it down. On your just focusing on acceptance, you used the example of accepting a decision. Now, I get accepting circumstances and situations and living with what's the situation, but would you promote accepting decisions? Or, in my world, you often get a lot of decisions that aren't correct, and, you have to fight for what you believe in.
This was more about accepting the situation that you're in, as opposed to the decision that you make. So if you want to put it in today's context, obviously 101 days ago, we were on lockdown. Doesn't matter what anybody said or tried to do. That was the situation we was in. So it's accepting the situation that is having to cause you to make this, making you adapt, whether it be an injury, whether it be, thank you, no, but we're not going to re-sign you. That is something that's out of your control. Now you have to accept that that's happened, but then it's what direction you take is what decision that you're going to take after that is what's then is the start of the, if you like, on the road of this adapt model. But the acceptance is of the situation, not necessarily of the decision. Now the decision that may have caused that situation may, as I use as an example with, a player, and I think I use Nick as an example of his coach saying, or his manager saying, Nick, thank you very much, but we're not going to renew your contract. Now, it might be the wrong decision, but the decision has been made, and that's the situation Nick will find himself in. Now, obviously, he's not just going to turn and say, okay, and walk out the door. He's going to try and have a chat and find out a bit more and find out why they came to that decision. But if they're adamant that that's the decision, he has to accept it from that particular club, and that's the situation he's in. It doesn't mean he should just throw his hands in the air and give up. There are other clubs he can go to, and there are other options, but it's the initial situation that you find yourself in. That's where the acceptance comes in.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Paul, I know you've got your hand up there. I don't know if you meant to.
I have, yeah, sorry. It was one for Nick, really. It's interesting since the advent of sort of mandated working from home, and I know a lot of us are technologists around here with development teams, etc. I'm interested in how you kind of keep that team ethic whilst you've got all your players sort of from home and in disparate areas. Is there kind of a way of, and without that context of playing the next game and the next thing to work upon, is there anything that you've learned over the lockdown on keeping those people engaged and keeping that team morale and team spirit?
Yeah, so funnily enough, what we did was set individual challenges for different groups of players, so backs, forwards, whatever position they might have played, and we challenged them to compete against one another, but made a bit of a game of it. So it wasn't, it was competitive, We wanted to see who would win, obviously, naturally, as rugby players, that's what we like. But we wanted it to be more fun and we wanted it to be more engaging. So videoing yourself doing specific challenges and stuff that you probably wouldn't try if you were training in a normal environment. And then we created leaderboards. We had quizzes around old games that we played. We try to keep the players engaged as much as possible through fun, as opposed to trying to keep them engaged through learning. I think one of the our competitive advantages in this area is that we have an ability to learn faster than others, and that's where we gain our competitive advantage. But the trouble being is that we just didn't know when we were going to go back to training, so or when we were going to go back to games. So that ability to learn was not necessarily at the forefront. It was more about keeping the players physically fit, but keeping them engaged and keeping them mentally healthy, so that now during this transition phase that we're in now, we see them come back in decent shape, and we can now focus on the learning element, where hopefully other teams are now trying to catch up on a physical element, which is hopefully going to give us the advantage moving forward.
Maybe just extending that. I mean, Liz and Derek, do you have any insights into how our Adam Peters and our Dinas and people like that have been adapting over these times? I mean, for someone like an Adam Peaty, no swimming pool. I mean, there's only so much you can do without a pool, I guess. Unless you've got some lap pool or something like that. But how have they been adapting?
So, do you want me to go first, Derek, and then you? Or yeah, cool.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think they went through a wave of emotions, and I'm really fortunate. I'm still connected to a lot of the various athlete worlds through my variety of roles. And I think initially there was that you got some people who the news of Tokyo being postponed was like the end of the world, and they all of a sudden didn't know which direction they were going to go in, because as an Olympian or a Paralympian perspective, you work in 4-year cycles, and so everything's planned for these 4 years to culminate at the games. And if you're in the beginning of your career and you're young, you look at it and you're like, okay, I've got 1 more year to get fitter, faster, stronger, and maybe my older competitors won't last that long and I'll have a better chance. So those people were like disappointed, but it wasn't the end of the world. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, who people are in the form of their life and they're like, it might not last till next year. So there was that element of it. And then also people that were for sure going to retire after Tokyo, and now they're like, oh my gosh, I've got another year. I'm going to have to postpone my house move, postpone my wedding, postpone my going to university, all these different things that they put on hold. And I think, but what was brilliant about it was people realized they weren't alone. And it was the first time, I think, that people actively talked about their mental well-being and their mental strength and seeking support from others. And like once you kind of troubleshooted what was in your control and what wasn't, to bring back everything we've talked about for the last hour, I think people looked at what they could focus on, and whether that be like Brendan was saying, time at home with family that you never get to spend when you're an athlete, or different ways of training. So like a lot of, and swimming is one of the hardest to replicate on land. Like that's a fact, right? Like because even a swim bench isn't really a great simulation of swimming. So people were trying new things, rowing machines, bikes. One Canadian swimmer built a swimming pool in her back garden out of what they call pallets and tarpaulin, and she filled it, and a lot of the swimmers then tethered, and we've got a number of swimmers, including Adam Peaty, who have got like hot tubs and they've tethered themselves and they're swimming against the current. So people were versatile, people adapted, but similarly people realized, I think, that out of everything that makes you an athlete, and it goes back to what I was saying about business people, the reason you do your job or your role is because you have the skills to do that. So that's not the bit in question. And like back to Nick's point, the players are going to be fit and strong when they need to be, because they've got that residual fitness, they've got that training. But if you don't harness their mental well-being, it doesn't matter how fit and strong and capable you are. If, like we always used to say, a happy swimmer is a fast swimmer. And it's true, because you can be in the best shape of your life, but if your brain isn't ready and you're not engaged mentally and you're not sitting in a good place, and this is true of the workplace as well, you're not going to do your best work. And I think so often as a population, we struggle to understand things we can't see. And for athletes, like we're programmed to think that harder, better, faster, stronger is going to make you win. But actually, I don't know if you agree, Derek, but like the older you get, you hopefully get wiser, but you realize that rest is part of the training. That isn't you being lazy or letting your competitors get ahead. That is you being smart to make sure your body is adapting. That word keeps coming up, but it could be your body adapts to the training that you've done. You recover, you reap the rewards, and then you can progress to the next stage of your training plan to maximize what that's got available to you. So actually, I think, yeah, it was difficult, but the principles are the same. One way is not a way for everybody. It doesn't suit everyone. And also, you've got the skill, you've got the residual skill to do whatever it is you want to do. You just have to nurture it so that you can be the best version of yourself.
I remember something, just going on what Liz said there about the older you get. I mean, the older I get, the faster I was, but that's a different story. But there's something that my old university maths teacher used to say. He said, in life, you've got to be as devious as a sewer rat. And I say that because as you get older and you can't perform at the same level, you do need to start dropping the amount of training you do, but rather than the quantity, it's the quality that you put into it, and you get to learn. Your coaches and your advisors get to know what works best for you. But going back to your original question, Paul, it's quite funny because unlike swimming, the one good thing you can do from an athletics point of view is you can go out and run if you're if you're in an athletic event, whether that's a sprinting, whether that's up to a marathon. Gets a little bit more difficult when you're throwing things, because not many people can go to the park and throw a javelin 90 meters without causing some sort of problems. But it's I've spoken and I advise a number of athletes, and I was chatting to a few of the current sprinters, and the first thought was, oh my god, the Olympics has been cancelled. What's that going to do to my training? What's that going to do to me? And I said, and these were sprinters I was talking to, and I said, imagine this: you line up at a race, it doesn't matter what race it is, and you stand at that 100-meter start and there's a massive wind in your face, massive wind against you. Guess what? Is that in your lane or is it in all 8 lanes? And they said, well, it's in all 8 lanes. So I said, so exactly. So I said, what you're going through, every one of your other competitors are going through as well. And it's going to be the person who can cope with this the best that will actually come out on top. And going to to some of the stuff that Liz was saying, it's how we cope with this stuff. It's that attitude. And I'm a massive believer, to be a champion, you need 2 things working at the same time. You've got to be physically in shape, but you've also got to be mentally in shape. And if you haven't got both of those working at the same time in conjunction with each other, it's not going to happen. You can be the fittest, fastest, strongest person in the world, but if you haven't got it up here, forget it. If you've got it up here but you haven't got it physically, forget it. Both of those need to work in sync. So what people have to learn to do, and I'm not saying it's easy, what sportsmen and women are having to do is take a deep breath, accept this situation, and I keep coming back to this, and make those provisions the best that they can, whether it is building a swimming pool in your back garden, whether it is doing sprints up and down your streets, whether it is, I don't know, picking up bits of rock and using it as a shot put in your garden, whatever the case may be. There's you've got to start being a bit more active in your thinking. And I hate the phrase thinking outside of the box, because I want to know who put us in them stupid boxes in the first place. But it is a case of thinking a little bit more laterally and looking at and finding different ways that, one, you can keep up your fitness and some kind of sports specific activity. More important, number 2, keep this on an even keel and keep it level and keep it where you want to be heading, because everyone has got that wind against them. Everyone has got that headwind. It's not just you. And I think it's something that people tend to forget. They kind of think that it's just them dealing with this, and it's not. Everybody has got this same thing. One last thing I'll quickly say is, I believe I'm big into motorsport. I used to race motorbikes for a long while, and this whole situation we find ourselves in, to me, is a bit like riding in the wet. Now, when I used to race and we ride in the dry, you know, we have a test day, then you have a race, then you have a qualifying day, then you have a race day. And if the test day was bone dry, the quick people would go herring past you. You couldn't do nothing about it. They were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds a lap quicker than you. And we used to do endurance racing over 8 hours, so you can imagine the kind of difference that there were. But when it rained, all of a sudden, those guys couldn't ride at the same speed because you've got to ride a completely different style, a completely different technique. And it kind of leveled the playing field, because all of a sudden I found, as a mediocre racer in the wet, actually it brought me on an even level with some of those guys who were 6, 7, 8 seconds a lap quicker than me. So I think this has brought things down to a much more level playing field. Maybe not on the physical side, but certainly on the mental side. And I can guarantee you, and I'm sure Nick and I'm sure Lizzie will agree with this, 30 minutes before the whistle goes, or the hooter, it's a buzzer, like a klaxon, I think, in swimming, or whatever it is, a gun in athletics, sorry. Before that goes, it's nothing to do with the physical state, because you can't do any more training. You can't go and do some extra push-ups, some extra weights, an extra session in the pool, some extra runs. It's not a physical thing. It is 100% a mental game. You know, so this is where the mental training really, really comes into essence. And this is where you're going to see some different winners and different champions next year, because it's going to be the people that can deal with this mentally, as well as have the physical prowess to perform at the highest level. Sorry for rambling.
No, not at all. Fantastic.
Just to, it's really interesting actually hearing that. And from a golf perspective, the biggest thing that I tell the young players coming through is don't get dragged into what others are doing. And, you know, Monty was a great example of this. Monty never used to practice. He won, you know, 8 Order of Merits in Europe, and he would turn up to an event on a Wednesday, play the Pro-Am as his practice round, and go play. And he was telling us a story at the charity day. He said at the Congressional US Open on the Thursday morning, bearing in mind every other competitor would have been there on a Tuesday or Monday, hitting balls on the range, playing the court. He had to ask Ken Brown where the practice range was on the Thursday morning before he went out for US Open. And he just stuck to that. He knew that that worked for him. Vijay Singh would have been hitting balls for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And that's what made him great. What I tell all of my young players coming through, there are certain, you know, attributes that you need to have. And there's coaches now that will say you need this amount of speed. And you see Bryson DeChambeau, and he's changing the game by getting big and he's getting speed. Yes, that will result from a stat perspective in hitting it further and giving you a better chance. But the biggest thing is just, you know, having trust in what got you to that level. So I've got some players who are a little bit more on the Monty side. You know, Jack Senior, you may never heard of him, but he's got his card for the first time. He was in the Walker Cup 2011 when Andy Sullivan came through, and Andy got to the Ryder Cup in 5 years, which is a hell of an achievement in golf, but he worked out what works for him. Jack was chasing what everybody else wanted to do. I need to practice all these hours. I need to be in the gym. I need to do it. He's finally found out that that's not for him. And he performs at his best by practicing less and playing more golf, and actually not being in the gym, you know, the whole time, because he was getting injured. So it's finding out what works for you and having the confidence to stick to that, because ultimately it's all about what's going to generate the performance. You know, you could be the best trainer and you could be doing all the supposed right things, but if that's not equaling performance, then it doesn't matter. So that it's really interesting, you know, to hear Derek and Liz's perspective on that.
Yeah, I think, Brendan, you're absolutely right, and it goes back to exactly what Liz started off with, is saying it's finding what's right, you know, for the individual. And it's funny you mentioned Monty in golf. I mean, I attempt to play golf, and there's a whole bunch of us old has-been athletes that meet up regularly and play. And you've got big old John Regis, who plays off of 7, who will not hit a ball in practice. You know, he might go and do a bit of putting, and he's out there and he will absolutely cream his drive down the, you know, down the middle of the fairway every time, which absolutely does our heads in. But no one can say or do nothing because he's bigger than us, all of us anyway. And then you've got the likes of me, all, you know, 150 balls before I go out and still hook it into the bushes on the right or something like that. And it's just finding what works for you. And we've all done it. I'm sure Liz can give examples of where you follow trends in sport. I can remember a number of years ago being a 400-meter runner where, you know, you are with 150 meters to go, you're going to be filled with lactic acid. And some smart Alex said, if you eat, you know, the anti-acid tablets, Rennie, I think they're called. Somebody came up with the thing that if you eat half a dozen Rennie about 30 minutes before you race, it slows down this, you know, the process of lactic acid. So for about 4 or 5 races, at the start of the race, all the whole lineup, everyone's foaming at the mouth because they're chewing on these Rennies, thinking it did nothing. So all these trends come and go. And now, do you know what? Out of all the hundreds of people that tried it, it might work for one. And that person introduces it into part of their regime. For the rest of us, it doesn't. It is about, and not just in sport but in business, finding what works for you. Just copying what your competitors do isn't the way. And the last thing that you want to be doing, as I refer to it, is running their race. You know, you want to run your own race, and you might take bits from them, but you don't want to be running their race. You want to be running your own race.
Yeah,
I'm really sorry. I've got to leave now. My wife needs a computer back. But thank you, everybody. She's got her own meeting now. Thank you all. It was really interesting.
Thank you so much, Brendan.
Cheers. Thanks,
Brendan. I totally agree with Derek in the sense that, but it's there's an element of trial and error, and again, it changes over time. And so, it like as an athlete, as a young athlete, you know nothing, right? So you're trying to absorb as much as you can. So you do trust your coach, and you do trust older athletes, and you do trust anybody really that's got any pearls of what was perceived wisdom, and you try things out. And it's the same in business. Like as a newbie coming in, you probably don't know everything, so you need people in your team that you can trust to have your best interests at heart, to fit into the group dynamic, and all be ultimately aiming for the same overall goal. So you need a coach or a manager or a business owner that has an open mind and is willing to let people have the safety to try things and know that it's okay to fail, have that freedom for it not to work, and appreciate that you're better off making short-term sacrifices to achieve the long-term goal than you are just being constantly, it's now or never. Because then you're right, Derek, there's so many examples, but I can remember 2 are just that I remember I was pretty chilled in my call room. Like I always trained super hard and knew that but I used to get really nervous. So then in my ready room, like where you get ready to race, so in your room just before you race, you're like 20 minutes with the 7 other athletes that are in your race, and the race before you and the race after you. And like our room was quite like chatty, like the girls I raced, we actually got on the whole really well, so we would chat, and like there'd be other people with big headphones on and towels over their heads and like pumping and jumping up and down. And I remember trying that once, and I swam so badly because I was just like wasted so much energy, and also I put so much energy into being that person because it wasn't natural for me, that then when I got to the race I was like whereas actually when I just did it my way, I was a lot calmer. And the other thing was, I'm only 5'5". I'm probably shrinking, but I was 5'5". So I'm not big for a swimmer, but in Paralympic swimming, it doesn't really matter because your disabilities play out differently. But I got the physiological makeup, like, so my body responds to training like big 6'5" male sprinters. And like, so we have this thing in competition where you train really hard and then you have a taper period where you rest up and your body like fine tunes itself so that you're as fresh as you can be for race day. And like in swimming, there's a range of different periods, but there's generally, if you've got this event, you work on that similar time scale. But for me, I knew I needed to stop weight 2 months before I raced my main event, which was unheard of for like the majority. So every time I moved programs, generally I would have to go through one cycle with a new coach where we got it totally wrong and I swam badly, because I would say to them, I've got an 8-week taper of weights, and they would go, oh, don't be so stupid, you're tiny. And then, but actually, so that's why, and that's the bit that shows it's not just, yes, it's down to the individual finding out what works for them, but it's having working with the people around you and having the team and that trust within the team that everybody wants the best for everyone, because you need that psychological safety to be able to give your opinion. And this was in the chat box further up when people were saying, like, we're not encouraged to talk about our mental well-being, or it's not said to be okay to do that, or if you talk about needing something to increase your mental well-being, does that make you then look weak from people? So I think it's important to realize that everybody's got their role to play in giving people the power to realize what works best for them, because unless you're working and you're surrounded by people who are willing to listen and understand and appreciate the difference, then it's never going to work. And like, away from sport and just life generally, another good example is like, so I only have the use of like one side of my body. So if you told me if you put food in front of me and ask, like a steak, and you asked me to eat it, I love food, so it would be gone really quickly. But if you put restrictions on me and said I had to use a knife and fork, then that meal wouldn't get eaten. And so like, we have to look at like empowering people and giving people that opportunity to do things a way that works for them, not thinking necessarily that our way is the best way for everybody. And I think, back to Paul, your diversity theme from earlier on this morning, that's why diversity is important too, and the acceptance of diversity being a strength, because actually we can be quite restrictive if we place barriers on people based on our perceptions. The end.
I tell you what's really interesting there, and Liz reminded me of something, and it's, you know, with a lot of the programs that I deliver, one of them is called Handling Change, and dealing with failure. And the really important thing that I find is with a lot of businesses, a lot of companies, we do this in sport because we have no choice. So, you know, we come up with, because we haven't got a crystal ball in sport, and you hope that you've prepared well, you hope that you've done the right kind of training at the right time, you hope you've started your season at the right time, you hope you peak at the right kind of time. And I say hope, there is a little bit of science that goes into it, but there's no guarantees that you have got this all right, because you only can control what you do, not what anybody else does. And I remember many years ago, as a young 400-meter runner, I was about 16 years old. I was ranked number 2 in the country, and I was racing the guy who was ranked number 1, and I'd never beaten him. He'd beat me about 8 or 9 times. And me, my coach, and my dad had decided that we were going to try a different tactic. So I was going to run the first half of the race much quicker than I normally do. And so we'd worked it out. And this was a few weeks before we decided this. Anyway, the day of the race, it was in Nottingham, I remember, and I was really nervous, unfashionably a lot more nervous than I normally am. And my dad turned around to me and said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, I'm really nervous because I can see this. Why are you so nervous?" I said, "Well, you know, I'm racing." His name was Kurt Morby. I said, "I'm racing Kurt, and I'm trying this new technique." And my dad sort of put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Derek, just calm down. You're not going to lose this race." And I kind of looked at him and I thought, I've never beaten this kid before. He's beaten me every time. I know the back of his head better than what he does. And he said, "You're not going to lose this race. One of two things are going to happen. You're either going to finish first or you're going to learn something. If you don't learn anything or finish first, then you can say you've lost the race." Now, he beat me because I went suicidally too quick for the first 200. The next time I kind of reeled it in a little bit, and I ended up beating him, and he never beat me again. But the point of that story is sometimes we have to try these things regardless to the outcome. And if it hasn't worked in the way that you want, you ask the questions, what did I do wrong, or what didn't I do that made it go wrong? You know, because it could be one or either that, you know, that could find you the answer. And it's the only way that we actually improve and evolve is actually by sometimes making those mistakes, and we have to learn lessons from those mistakes that we made. I never ever ran at that age 200 meters in a 400 that quick ever again. My first world championships, I ended up winning a silver medal at my first worlds in 1987. gutted in my performance because I went off again way too quick. There was a wind against down the back straight, but in my head and in that call room that Liz was talking about, for us it's 45 minutes before the race. You're sat in a room with the other 7 competitors, and in my head I'm going, right, I'm gonna hit it for the first 2. I'm going past Butch Reynolds, I'm going past Thomas Schoenleber, and I did for the first 200, and for the first 200 all the commentators around the world was talking about me. And then the second 200 didn't quite happen the way that that I wanted it to do. But I learned an important lesson, and I never ever again ran that quick when I was a headwind against me in a race. So my dad always used to refer to things that we learn. There's 2 ways you can learn. There is the theoretical lessons where you read, you're taught, or the other one that my dad used to call it was object lessons. And they were things that you actually physically went through, experience. If you've got a little child and you say, don't touch that, it's hot, don't touch it, and all of a sudden they go, oh, it's hot. Guess what? You don't need to tell them again because they've actually found out through an object lesson rather than a theoretical lesson and being told. So there is cause at times and a necessity to actually try these things and maybe not have them work in exactly the way that you want. Sometimes having that little bit of failure is a good thing. I'm going to have to run now. Sorry, I took a call on there, but I've just sold one of my cars and he's on his way to pick it up. So I need to I need to go and sort that out.
I think that, I mean, look, I'm very, very grateful for everyone hanging on this long. Sorry, Liz, are you going to have to go as well? Or I've lost your connections, but I think you're saying yes.
Yes, I am saying
yes.
Yes.
Look, thank you both ever so much for hanging on for so long. Matt, I'm sure you'll join with me just saying, I think it's been fantastic today. Really, really grateful for your time.
Yeah, Paul, I'd just say, so grateful for everyone giving up their valuable time. As we said, this is the 16th week of doing the forum. I think we're pleased to announce, I think we peaked at 240 people. The feedback down the side has been amazing. We'll get back to that. I think, touched on some issues. I took a lot away from this, the importance of diversity, inclusion, mental health, well-being, performance management, learning from your mistakes. I think it's been absolutely phenomenal. So, on behalf of everyone, thank you for, giving an hour and a half of your time and the pre-calls. I think, we couldn't be any more pleased with it. It's been a tremendous event. So, we'll sweep it all up and we'll get some stuff out. So, just for the panelists, if there's anything we can do for you guys, we'd love to sort of promote this and help with anything that you need to do. I'm going to be rolling out the ADAPT model within Robert Half UK, and I'm going to brand that as my own, Derek.
Yeah, exactly.
Where do I send the invoice, mate? Where do I send the invoice for that one? While I remember very quickly, Nick, Greet Bronson says to say hi. Apparently, Greet Bronson.
So Nick,
Matt, sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I know Greet. Yeah. From years ago, yeah.
She said to say hi.
Thank you also to everyone for joining us afterwards as well. So I can see Stephen and Paul and others on screen, and Kath and everyone else that I can see on the sidebar. Thank you ever so much. You make it every week, so thank you also ever so much for your questions and participating. It's great to see you all.
Brilliant.
So
thanks,
we
guys.
look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.